It's been a while since we went over the other Blaze Master weapons and how they played in the demo, but Lance was delayed. I needed time to think, and I also had a lot going on at the time. I wanted to put effort into this one. Lance is and has been my main since I started playing Monster Hunter all the way back in Try, so I felt it deserved more. So we'll be splitting this video into 4 sections. My initial thoughts on Wild's Lance, the history of the Lance, and then we'll go into other people's thoughts in contrast to my own, and then finishing off with the community event analysis. This is going to be a long one, but still to the end, because we're going to be doing an analysis on the situation of the Lance from how it was to how it got to where it is now. So, let's go. The Lance, a weapon built on the foundations of consistency, thrusts, pokes, and charges, always able to react and counter-react to any attack coming our way. Yet in the most recent Monster Hunter game, Monster Hunter Wilds, all of that has changed, and it hasn't gone down well. Wars, riots, mayhem in the streets, wars of which the Monster Hunter community has never seen in its history. And even I, a soldier on the front lines, ready to show Capcom my... Yo, Capcom announced the Lance is getting an overhaul. Wait, what? Really? Nah, impossible. Nah, for real. They even announced an event to go over the changes. Oh man, I was ready to rip into Capcom about their mess ups. But fine, let's see what they've been cooking. Okay, blocking. Alright. Yeah, that's your normal counter. Oh, okay, you can dance back. Yo, that looks... What the hell was that? Yo! Timeline averted, boys. Lance is saved! Yeah, you heard it here, guys. Was a great way to end 2024, knowing that Lance's standing counter is back. Now, I didn't hate Wild's Lance. If I was going to rank how I genuinely feel about Lances, he'd be a quick ranking from memory of the most recent entries. Lance has been my bread and butter since my inception into Monster Hunter. The weapon I'd take into any serious battle. Yeah, when I tried it in Wilds, something felt weird. There was a couple things off I just really didn't vibe with, but there were some new additions that were amazing. Now, I'm all up for change. In fact, I've been asking more to be done with the Lance for a while. More than just the standard poke, dodge to the side or counter. Since my introduction to the series, we've had small changes, but nothing grand. Nothing to put my soul on fire. Although GU did set me up for a good ride. The additions of art and styles mixed up enough for me that the Lance in that game never leaves me tired of it. And then similar with Rise and Sunbreak. But base Rise had some issues with some Y-bug moves, namely Twin Vine and Anchored Rage. Twin Vine was alright. The ability to leap to your target is very useful, although everything apart from that was lackluster. The way the move came out, the attack options from the air were just not enough for me. In Sunbreak, they did add the additional guard values to it, which was awesome. But everything else apart from that was the same. And then there was Anchored Rage, a counter, which gave you a buff increasing your damage based on the move you defended against. But not by how strong the attack was, it was based on the knockback it gave you. That's just weird, man. So the normal way of playing the weapon with guard wasn't able to take advantage of this ability, as your knockback would be decreased, decreasing your potential damage. What an oversight. Yet in Sunbreak, they fixed it up. Back to G's way of overall power of the move itself. Thank GOG. And even though in Sunbreak they did add a lot of damage to the weapon through the hop back and forward thrust, which was cool and all, it kind of did get a bit old fast. Anyways, what I'm trying to say is, I like it when there's more ways to play a weapon, and Wilds for sure gave us that. I didn't have issues that they made changes to the weapon itself. It's just that the changes they made, I personally did not agree with. But before we continue, I feel like I need to say, it's fine if you personally loved or hated it, more power to you. I'm just here stating my opinions. And we'll get into other people's opinions shortly. A couple weeks ago, I made polls on what people thought of each weapon in the beta. And alongside those, we had videos for each of the Blade Master weapons. Never did any videos for ranged weapons, as I don't really play those, so there's not much I could really add to the conversation. And the Lance results were pretty interesting, with 241 votes as of now. 31% of people saying they love it, 46% saying they like it, 18% saying they don't like it, and 5% saying they hate it. To be honest, there was more on the love side than I was expecting. I thought we'd see more people in the middle, either liking or disliking, which I mostly got right. We'll get into those comments later on in the video, but first we gotta talk about some of the main things I did not like. So, what didn't I like? Well, the countering. It just felt wrong. The Lance's defining feature was the fact it could keep up the assault during your poke strings. Being able to counter at any point gave us versatility in our gameplay. No matter the foe, we always had the ability to counter back right in time. Unless of course the move was truly unblockable. Then you're kinda screwed. The issue was, in Wilds, it wasn't accessible like that. In fact, it felt better to block and aim for a perfect parry, which was fine, but it didn't have the same flow as we used to have. So where did they move the counter? Where did it go? Well, to the end of the high thrust combo, which sounds so bizarre. Something that was accessible at any time was moved to the end of a DPS combo string? A move that was able to be used almost instantaneously was altered to the end of a free poke string combo? Like, the fuck? On top of that, now it doesn't even counter. It's more like a heavy armored move to deal damage back at the enemy, depending on how strong the ability they send your way. At this point, it isn't even a counter anymore. It's something totally different. And the question is why? Why did Capcom go down this route? I think I have an idea, and it's something I've been talking about in real life with my friends, and also we've talked about it on this channel. The truth of why Lance changed the way it did in Wild was due to how every other weapon has become a Lance. The Lance's unique mechanic, its key feature, its signature defying trait, countering, has now moved to every other weapon, and the Lance as of late hasn't been given much in return. But to do this topic justice, we gotta go back in history and talk about the Lance. But if you wanna skip straight to what everyone else thought about the weapon, go ahead to the time on screen right now or check the timestamps below. I'll mainly focus on Tri onwards, as I never played in the first or second gen. Back in Monster Hunter Tri, the weapons for the most part were simpler, and when it came to the Lance, you had your mid pokes, high pokes, dash attacks, wide sweep, and counters. This has been the Lance for the longest of times. It wasn't just the Lance that had its own identity. Every weapon had its own place in Monster Hunter. The short shield, a fast moving and agile weapon, or the greatsword, slow, focused, and powerful. And then there's the longsword, a midpoint of fast, accurate strikes with power, and so on. Everything had its home, and so did the Lance, a beacon of reactive gameplay. A weapon that rewarded well-studied hunters who understood their opponent's limitations and their own. Going into 4U, they added the ability to turn around with the Lance from a dash. And in that game, they also added two more complicated weapons, the Charge Blade and Insect Glaive. Both very unique in their own right, focused on either delivering devastating attacks or agile, fast-paced and flexible gameplay. Very welcomed additions to the series. And then Generations came out. A game I've talked about many times in the past couple of years. The game that puts Capcom's curiosity, creativity, and passions to its maximum, adding in many different ways to play your favorite or least favorite weapon, styles and arts, guild, striker, bushido, and aerial style. 4 unique ways to play each weapon. And then in Generations Ultimate, 2 more were added, Alchemy style and the almighty Valor style. Every weapon in GU had a way to counter or iframe remove, something which has never happened before. But what would happen to the Lance, a weapon that can already counter? Well, they decided to improve on the way it countered. Remember that fact, it will come into play later in the video. Bushido style gave the Lance a new way to reward the hunter for guarding at the right time, an ability that was carried on to Monster Hunter Rise. Even though every other weapon could iframe throughout moves, us Lance users gained a new offensive power to utilize at our fingertips. And man, what a power it was. And it didn't stop there. Valor Lance. Valor in itself felt like a blessing from the gods. What I thy weapon done yearn for, it shall be bestowed upon thee. And thus bestow the Lance with a rush that turned offensive power into unlimited power. But going on from there, going into Monster Hunter World, while every weapon lost their styles and arts, there was one weapon that received counters into its main kit. A couple weeks ago, we went over the truth that changed Monster Hunter combat forever, going from the 4th to the 5th gen. And in my analysis, I came to the conclusion that Valor Longsword in GU changed what we know as Monster Hunter. If you'd like to know more about that, check out the video in the description down below, or the card at the top of the screen right now. Trust me, it's a hell of a watch. Anyway, the vision of Valor Longsword led to the second weapon in the series to receive counters baked into its kit, Monster Hunter World's Longsword. Now, I'm not here to discredit the Longsword and its changes in this video, just merely stating my analysis and what it led me to believe. If you ever disagree or agree, let me know down below and we'll talk like always. So, given the Longsword gained defensive capabilities, did it lose anything? Well, no. Everything the Longsword could do before, it could still do and more. Yet what about the Lance? Going from the 4th gen to World, they lost the fact that they were the only weapon to rely on the counter mechanic. And to go along with that, what did the Lance gain going from GU to World? Well, it gained a new defensive move called the Power Guard, allowing us to turn our usual counter stance into a stalwart defensive stance, ready to strike back at our foes whenever the occasion requires. and the ability to dash forward and strike with our lance. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Yet the longsword gained the keystone, the quintessence, the core of the lance gameplay, yet we didn't receive much in return, the beginning of a struggling world. Moving into Iceborne, the lance gained an enhancement to the counter, with the counter claw, a cool move which makes most lance mains froth at the mouth. Even though the ability itself is cool, overall every weapon gained something uniquely awesome with the Clock's Claw, which was great and all, but didn't change the situation the lance was in after starting to lose its unique identity. Now let's move into the next game, which accelerated the distorted vision of the lance in the Monster Hunter franchise, Monster Hunter Rise. Now before we continue in this section, I gotta say, I love Monster Hunter Rise. It's my third favourite in the series, and if you've been following me for a bit, you'd probably know which one my favourite one is. The second, however, is a bit trickier to figure out. I don't normally talk about that game much, and we'll get into that another day. So, even though I love Rise, I'm not afraid to criticize it. I think it's better to be open that way. Hell, I even did a 50-minute video going over all the faults 3 years ago, and even though the quality sucks, still one of my favorite videos I've ever made. You can recognize greatness, victories, yet still accept the failures and folly. And one thing that made this era a bit weird for Lance were counters. Yep, that meme again. Now, what do I mean by this? As we said, the Valor Longsword bred the changes we see in World with World's Longsword, and the popularity in that game, I believe, inspired many changes in Rise where counters were given out to every weapon, like Capcom were Oprah Winfrey, via switch skills or the Y-Bug itself. Even the Lance gained new counters. Now for me personally, this was tricky for me. I loved arts and styles in GU. Adept Longsword was one of my favorites, or even Adept Greatsword, Valor Greatsword. Hell, anything Greatsword basically. I enjoyed being able to counter and attack back at a monster, and I liked doing it again in Rise, but it felt different. While in GU every weapon gained a way to iframe, armor, or in some way counter a move, the Lance was also given strong abilities in its own right to make up for that fact. Yet in Rise, that wasn't really the case. Offensive wise, in the base game, we really didn't get much at all. Yes, we got Spiral Thrust, which I personally really liked, but compared to all the other offensive and defensive moves every other weapon got in the game, it felt like the Lance was being left behind. And I think Capcom realized that as well. Then going into Sunbreak, Capcom gave us the triple poke spam combo, a series of strings that boosted our damage up the ladder, which was nice to see. They also added Skyward Thrust, which is cool in theory, but in practice, it kinda sucks. Once again, we gained some offensive capabilities, but so did everyone else. In fact, the Greatsword, which could now counter straight into their true charge slash, a move that can do insane amounts of damage, cool as hell, but like damn, what place does the Lance even have in Monster Hunter now? No, not Monster Hunter now, that crappy ass mobile game, never catch me playing that. The only Monster Hunter mobile game you ever catch me playing is this masterpiece right here. I'm actually super proud of this segment. I've been trying to make a Monster Hunter puzzles joke for months now. Anyway, let's get back on track. Every weapon was gaining what made the Lance the Lance. And to add insult to injury, it felt like other weapons did what the Lance did, even better than the Lance itself. For example, more and more moves were becoming unblockable, leading to weapons who didn't even have a shield being better at defending themselves via iframes than weapons which had them, as unblockable attacks can still be iframed or armored through, while we, the Kings of Garden, were having to be more careful of how to handle these situations. Of course, guard up is the answer there, a much more accessible skill in Rise than it was in World, thank GOG. A skill that defended us from the unblockable menace. Or did it? Even with guard up, there are still some moves I like to call truly unblockable. Moves that even with the skill, they would still hit the fuck right out of you. God damn. I shit you not. The amount of monsters I had to be on the top of my game to watch out for those moves was crazy. Sharagu, Primordial, Flaming Espionage, all monsters that if you weren't prepared to pack your bags and run at any moment, you'd lose your life. Painful. But I won't lie, we did have ways around it, using the Sheath and Retreat Silkbind skill, allowing you for quick escapes, probably the main reason it was added into the game in the first place. But despite that, it leaves the Lance in a tricky spot of where it could go in the future. If all the other weapons can do what the Lance does best, and sometimes even better, where does that leave the Lance? If every weapon can become a Lance, the Lance had to evolve. One interesting thing, an important thing to mention, is how ironic it is after Rise Break, many people hoped and thought Capcom would take a step back, move away from iframes, counters, super armor and all. Hell, Even Capcom ran marketing returned to World. But seeing Wild's gameplay, we got counters, iframes, auto lock-on, long-range cannon fire, and anime-like finishes. Like damn, I guess not what some were expecting, but I'm sure we'll adapt. Even though there's still no arts and styles, silk binds or anything of the sort, the counters still remained. The lingering effect of the Valor Longsword persists into the 6th gen. Capcom saw how popular counters made the longsword and spread them across the rest of the weapons. Either in the form of perfect parries, offset attacks, or iframes, cause why the fuck not? But this time, they needed to do something special to the lance. If every other weapon had a bit of an essence of the lance had to evolve. And one way they've done that is by evolving the lance from a boxer, observing opponent's moves, and reacting to their actions to some type of martial arts master. Anything they throw at us, we react back in a plethora of ways. Perfect parries, dodges, high thrust counters and all. I believe Capcom figured if they want to improve the lance but keep it similar, the answer wasn't only in offensive capabilities. They wanted to improve the lance dance. You know, when you're in the zone, dodging to the side, countering, getting that final poke right in at the last moment before going into a counter. They took that aspect, filled us with new options and variations, changing the dance into a waltz, a masquerade even. The lance moved from being a background dancer on stage to the prom queen herself. Yet there was an issue. In Capcom's attempt to evolve the lance, they changed the fundamental thing that made the lance, the counter thrust. As I was saying before, instead of being able to access it out of the bat at any time, it was linked to your high thrust combo. I honestly just can't think of why they do that. It doesn't really make sense to me. Unless someone down below has any ideas, that'd be great. I was overjoyed when the community event happened and they announced they've changed the counter seemingly back to how it used to be, and we'll get into that in a bit. It wasn't just me who had this issue though. Reading over the comments, there were many people who felt similar. So I think this is a good time to go through what some of you had to say on the lance. Bear in mind, this is all pre-community event. We'll start with Persera Silkis Cowdy, who says, I genuinely didn't like anything about it. It's so sluggish. I really don't like the new finisher that comes out after the pokes, and they got rid of the counter thrust. So starting off with the fact he thinks the weapon is sluggish, which I can relate to. At first, it felt like I was moving underwater. Somehow felt even slower and less fluid than old Gen 1 stunter. And the fact I felt that way is pretty crazy. But after some time, I did adjust to it. Anyway, his last words, and they got rid of the counter thrust. Damn, it's as if they delivered the final blow that ended your lance career forever. He then goes on to say, my guess is that we see a lot of people sticking to the triple poke evade since you can't do the counter thrust anymore. That is for sure a safe way to play, and I'd imagine a lot of people will play that way. But there was a new DPS combo that people came up with the lance. High thrust, wide sweep and mid thrust. But for me, I have a problem with wide sweep, which we'll get into later. To be honest, he wasn't the only one to say this. Many people had similar feelings. We got Ultra9 who says, I still like the weapon, but a few things felt wonky to me. The different camera controls for focus mode, low vs high poke, is odd. Also, I felt like the counter thrust option after 3 pokes was too annoying to use for barely a benefit. And yeah, I agree. It seems nonsensical to put at the end of that combo. I can't see a reason for it. It really seems like Capcom didn't know what they wanted to do with it. So they moved it to the end of the high thrust so they could at least say, at least the lance can still counter. In some way at least. But I will say, the role of the counter thrust has changed and it's now being replaced with the perfect parry. At Lancer Nobu says, charge counter was extremely difficult due to its maximum effectiveness. And it felt like you had to use it, since nothing in the kit comes even close in terms of DPS. A different angle, but also echoes his frustration with the move. We have Asheram as well, who starts off saying he really enjoyed the lance. He wants to make that clear, he loved it and couldn't get enough. Although, he did have some issues. Near the end of his comment, he says, think Lance would benefit from the charge counter being accessible without your free charge combo. Yep, that would be nice. I suppose we should be counting our blessings that we got it back. Next we got Anonymous, the guy who can't help but write a freaking mountain of text. We're way past the wall of text at this point, like holy crap. I had to go at him on Discord for it. His comment doesn't even fit on my screen. Anyway, he says counter thrust doesn't exist anymore. They replaced it with the normal guard being usable to cancel combos. Less interesting in my opinion. Then later on goes on to say the charge counter is super hard to use. but you already know my stance by now. Perhaps we'll get used to it, but in general, it just doesn't feel natural. It feels as if you have to go out your way to make it useful, instead of it inherently being useful. Biker 11 also says similar. I think you should be able to charge counter after any move, as it being locked behind 3 pokes feels really strange. Seems to be a common thought between many Lance users. Now let's move on to Twitter. Shout out to MH Fran Lancer, who also didn't like the counter being locked behind the pokes, saying you need to pull it out perfectly if you want to take advantage of its damage. He later clarifies that with practice, he's been getting better with it and showed a great clip where he pulled it off. Nice. So with practice, there's hope for all of us. And lastly, for those who didn't like the changes to the counter, with Ator181 who says, really just wish charge counter was easier to get into, otherwise I like it. Damn, for some, it was that simple. But don't get twisted, there are many people who love the changes to the counter. At HoneyConav, the positive bastard says, the classic triple poke now ends in a 4th power poke on high counter thrust, or triple poke mid for DPS, which helps me stay engaged, judging whether I had a window to power charge counter thrust, or if I should continue to pressure with triple thrust. It's true the new triple thrust combo rewards aggressive gameplay, regardless of how tricky it is to pull off. If you understand the timing of the monster, probably to the level of Ultra Instinct, you'll be able to deal devastating attacks back at the monster. And I agree, it's nice that the Lance has many new options on how we want to handle the situations in front of us. But it's tricky, because if they don't balance it correctly, one option would tend to be used over the other. We got Joss who says, I actually find the charge counter to be really satisfying option for big damage and even negates chip damage if timed right. And yeah, he's right. If you can do it correctly, the damage is great, but I didn't know it negates chip damage. If someone down below in the comments can verify that for me, I'd appreciate that. He then goes on to say, the ability to insta guard out of almost anything really makes you feel like an impenetrable wall. So similar to HoneyConav, even though the triple poke counter is difficult to use, you have a safer yet weaker option by using perfect parry, and I'm quite a fan of that idea actually. Lastly for this section, we'll go with the Real Currents, who says similar to Honey and Joss about it being tricky but satisfying. He then goes on to say, perhaps many people have misunderstood the counter's removal, and I quote, importantly, I feel like a lot of people aren't fully understanding the removal of counter stance, to be honest. Many seem to think that our counter has moved to the high poke combo finisher after the 3rd poke. In reality, our counters are now a follow-up from any guard, and it seems like way too many people haven't spent enough time with it to understand that. It's an interesting take, which I do have opinions on, but let's finish what else he has to say. The charge counter after 3 pokes is functionally a completely new move, and this next part might ruffle up some feathers, so I'll remind people, opinions are opinions, they are fine to have. Even if you disagree or agree, those are fine too. In the end, let's just try to be civil towards each other. People are hung up on it being the old counter stance purely because it has the old animation. It's now a skill-based timed counter rather than an auto block retaliation, and it has insanely high damage if you use it correctly. Now, what do I think about this? Honestly, he's right. People are hung up on it, and yes, if it wasn't called counter thrust, perhaps people wouldn't have been so insistent on it being a problem. He also mentions the animation too. But even though that is true, it's also a fact that it is called counter thrust and it is the same animation, and it has fundamentally changed how people enjoy playing the Lance. I don't want to get too much into psychology here, but people's perceptions lead people's emotions and judgments. If they are emotionally attached to something, but the way they feel isn't based on actual facts and what is the true reality of events, it won't matter if their perception is fixed in a certain direction, and the direction is put in this way because unfortunately the move is called counter thrust and it is the same animation, and they've shifted what people expected as a staple for the Lance itself. But this does go two ways. Capcom could have led the changes in a direction where it'd be a completely new move, changing how people's perceptions line up, and also us as hunters should be willing to adapt to those changes, which I do agree on. Although to be honest, in the end, none of that matters, because regardless of realities, as I said, if someone feels a certain way about something, that's the way they feel. It's not easy to change that with my ramblings or wall of text, which is sad, but it's the way life is. If truth could persuade people's emotions that easily, I'm sure we'd live in a more peaceful world. But never mind me, sorry. I was feeling my deep emotions way too much for writing this section. Let's get back on track. Overall, Comment is right. The perfect parry is the new way of countering. I believe I also said this in my You May Not Like This Lance video. It felt better to just block fell counter rather than the high thrust combo. So once people adjust to it, they may like it more. but at the same time, the triple poke mechanic doesn't seem practical. I can't think of any action game where a block was put at the end of a combo, let alone in the middle. I'm sorry, I gotta rant a bit because it's nonsensical to me. It feels like a gimmick rather than something practical, and the lance has always been a practical weapon. In fact, Z here wrote a great comment saying the counter frost is at the end of the 3 poke high frost counter. I would like it if you could press and hold the mechanic on the high frost so we could use it during the high frost instead of at the end, which honestly just makes way more sense than what they've done. This would have fixed everything for me and possibly for many others as well. I mean, I would really like someone down in the comments to tell me right now, can you make sense of why this counter is at the end of the high frost combo? Because so far from reading all of this, people have been saying it's misunderstood, they like that you have options. No one has actually said why it makes sense for it to be at the end of the high frost combo. It kind of feels like some of us have just accepted that it's at the end rather than actually thinking, does it actually make sense for it to be at the end? Because I would argue it doesn't make sense for it to be at the end. Anyway guys, no hate to Current. This is a fantastic comment and made me feel like I'm debating him right now. I really respect it. My emotions are targeted towards the move itself, not his opinion. Anyway, he goes on to finish off saying, I know muscle memory is hard to relearn after several generations of counter stance, but I really do think people need to understand block counters and the new charge counter. We functionally gained a lot more than we've lost from World, and the button inputs are just different and need practice. So yeah, he's right. Perhaps we just need to relearn something us Lance users haven't really had to do much of lately. Maybe playing generations of Rise with a depth counter. Then yeah, you've had to adapt before. And for those who use the move, you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, thanks all. That's the counter thrust out of the way. Now let's move into what other people had to say. Some people called it sluggish, while others thought it was fine. For example, let's go back to Patera Silk. He talked about how sluggish the new triple poke finisher is. Which yeah, it did feel a bit sluggish. You had to really commit to it once you threw it out. And aiming it in general was difficult, but it would have helped to actually know what particularly he found sluggish about it. Maybe you can find out more by looking at Sonos's comment. Let's go back to what Lance Nobu said. It wasn't about the triple poke, but it's about some things he didn't like, particularly about how the weapon played. And for him, what it seems like he found sluggish were the options you have out of your perfect parry. I've heard people say similar, definitely about the payback thrust, saying the wind up to use it and the lag after is a bit too much. At times, I had to really make sure it's what I wanted to do in case I was going to get hit due to the lag. I think it will be fine on most monsters. The faster ones, however, will be tricky to use it on. We have Fury Lover, aka Lance main. You can guess what weapon he mains. Who said quite a bit. He never played the beta himself, but seeing from the outside in, he said the Lance was interesting but seemed a bit off. He felt as if it was trying to be a tank, yet limit it more, while also at the same time giving it more in other areas. He then goes on to say they slowed it down as if they're anchoring it to the ground. And then we have Riker here, who says similar, saying Lance is okay in wilds. It feels a bit slow and the damage is a bit low, but it's an interesting evolution. So even though it's slow, which I do agree with, he still finds it an interesting evolution. And yeah, I'm still baffled that they made it somehow slower than it used to be in the old gen, like back in Monster Hunter 4, 3 and all that stuff. And I 100% feel the same way. I'm super interested in getting to use it more, but we have to see what Capcom have done now that things have changed to it. There's Mr. Who there, who says, I'd say it was the most awkward of a transition for me. It's similar to World, but had differences that seemed jarring, which I think many of us felt at first. But the more you play with it, it starts to grow in you, little by little. And then he says, why could you reposition during the mid attacks but not the high? Another great point. There's this weird focus mode thing where the mid thrust you can move side to side, but with the high you can't. Why? Who really knows? It's just how it is. And similar with the countering being different. Is it good? Maybe. I don't know. Some of these changes just seem unnecessary. They knew they wanted the lance to change, but weren't sure how they were going to change the lance. Therefore, when it comes to the whole situation with the high thrust, but like I said before, maybe the more we play with it, the more we'll understand of why they made these changes. But for right now, I gotta say, I don't really understand it fully. And next we got Viol, who says, didn't like it. And I was one of the first really hyped after the launch trailer. The movement and not needing to hop between pokes fell off. I know every weapon is slower and lacks input feedback on hit, but it felt especially weird on Lance, because it has no flashy big moves to begin with. So poking with a wet noodle feels bad. Wet noodle, honestly, he ain't wrong there. It kind of felt similar to me. Maybe it was a no hit stun or the lack of impact, but it just felt so off-putting. I got used to it from using the weapon over a couple of hours, so it worked out in the end, and I'm sure it will be fine in the full game, but in the demo, something definitely was off there. He then goes on to say how mid thrust 3 doing more damage than high thrust 3 pisses him off so much. He never wants to use mid thrusts, and then goes on to say, and I quote, "I want to poke the monster in its stupid high above the ground face, an asshole." I've never thought about poking high like that before, but to each their own, I guess. But to be honest, I get it. I honestly do. I don't know why they made mid thrust stronger than high. Like, for what reason or purpose after so many games of high being stronger? High thrust also felt slower in this game, and I'm pretty damn sure in the past they were the same speed, but maybe it's just me misremembering things. Perhaps they also decreased the damage due to the new counter thrust playstyle at the end of the combo, but yet it's still odd. In the end, I did adjust to it, but I do miss using high thrusts. Once again, our friend MH Fran Lancer said the weapon is slower and more sluggish than World. A lot of people are using the word sluggish. They might as well give us a snail shell in the game as a shield for how slow it is. At least the weapon will be on theme. Anyway, he goes on to say he wouldn't mind if the weapon's damage was balanced. We can't have slow weapons that also don't deal enough damage. Yes, correct. And that is why balance matters. A topic I've wanted to cover for the longest of times, but we have to leave that for another day. He then ends on saying that Vice's lance in the beginning had bad damage output, but at least the weapon was faster. I really hope they balance this right, but we have to wait and see on that one. Yeah, I'm with you there. The lance has never been a slow weapon, slow in how it moves, but not slow in how it attacks. The attacks have always been a decent speed, not as fast as Sword Shield, but faster than Longsword and Charge Blade. Yet in Wilds, it felt slow and weak, which was strange. But on that one, let's wait for the full game to see what they have for us. But now let's move into the more positive stuff. Back again with my girl Honey Konav. C says, microaggression, the weapon. And my third favorite main. Let's fucking go! You gotta love the energy. She then goes on to say most of her experiences with the lance came from World. She feels the wild lance is intuitive and a great in-your-face cling to the monster, threatening them with so many microaggressive attacks. And she is goddamn right. That was the thing I did like a lot about Wild's lance. It felt really good at just keeping right in there, right in the thick of things. Waltz, as I said before, is a dance between you and the monster, but no normal dance, an exquisite ballet of peril and precision, and I love that part of it. Back to Twitter of MH Fran, I think this lance is the best we have ever got. It's a mix of Valor Lance, World Lance, and some Sunbreak Lance. I shield bash a lot, but I like they still made the shield more offensive. Despite the few complaints I have, I am quite pleased with the lance. And I do agree it's a nice and interesting mix of other lances from different generations. Definitely Valor Lance. One of the things I actually pointed out back in my first videos, that this definitely seems like Valor Lance mixed with some World Lance. I don't really see Sunbreak Lance myself, to be honest, but yeah, I do understand what he's trying to say. I think this is the best lance when it comes to the options we have to play. Like, they've added so much and it's very interesting. It's just as an overall package, I think there's more that they could tighten up for this to be the funnest lance in the long term, but I need to play with it more to really understand how I feel. We have Cannonball04 who says, love how aggressive you can be with the lance in Wilds, which adds to the concept of the warts I was talking about. Every time I say warts, it just reminds me of that Gundam Wing movie, Endless Warts. If you know, you know.
But why?
I'll kill you.
Not a scene from the movie, but still an iconic moment. Anyway, he then goes on to say he hates the wide sweep has replaced with a leaping thrust that barely goes anywhere. And yeah, it really doesn't. The move just kind of seems a bit strange. Makes me wonder if it will be a similar thing to how in Rise, dodges were terrible without at least one evade distance. Will evade distance affect this move? I guess we have to wait and see. We have Hito the Living Drawing who says Lance and Gun Lance definitely needed a buff, and it feels like they gave them one in this generation. They both needed one for sure. Gun Lance with his shelling and shot levels, and Lance with basically everything we've already talked about. And then Celtica says, at first I had trouble adapting to the fact that the perfect block is just a normal block, but now after a couple hunts, I got it down, and that focus strike is so good. The level of aggression you can keep up while still maintaining Lance's S tier defense is godly, honestly. So like many people have said, with some practice, it grew on them. But I also want to bring it back to the leaping thrust to see what others have to say about it. Josh seems to be a fan of it out of neutral. Love how he says that. You can tell he likes fighting games. But on the other side, Anonymous says the leaping thrust got nerfed on speed and damage, which is true. In Sunbreak, that shit was OP and felt great. I didn't want it to be as strong as that, but at least much better than how it feels in Wilds. Remember, going back to current, Even he loved Wild's Lance, but he said similar. Lance Noble said the Leaping Thrust and many other moves have higher animation commitments, but the damage isn't there for those commitments in my opinion. Doomy the Great, although he says it's the best update to Lance yet, goes on to say we've lost a charge sweep into Leaping Thrust combo from Sunbreak, and simultaneously the weapon is slower than World, which makes me really deep. What timeline are we on? I didn't think we'd get here. Patawa Silk says the Leaping Thrust feels worse, and Asheram feels the Leaping Thrust should have kept as the guard dash, which probably would have been for the better. And then goes on to say the Leaping Thrust is overall way slower with a longer wind up to the attack. It's strange how everything else is getting faster, yet the lance is getting slower. For example, the longsword, or dual blades, shield, and even the hammer and greatsword, all giving more freedom in their moves, less lag, and ways to handle different situations. While yes, we have new ways to deal with situations, we also looked into uncancelable animation windows. It's odd. No one seemed to really defend that point in the comments, so in general, people aren't really liking that change. Being slower than both games in the 5th gen, I think is a miss overall, but let's hope there's some improvements there. And I also just want to point out that Josh saying that the guard dash also being slower and should go further. Cannonball, Anomalous, Asheram, and Riker all agree with that sentiment. Let's hope they increase the speed and distance for both moves. But enough of that. How about we move on to the perfect parry and overall feelings with that. And this time, let's start positive. Starting off with my boy DD Vikings, always good to see you. And he says, I absolutely love the lance, such an underrated weapon and the potential for easier KOs with the perfect guard and focus strikes is just the icing on the cake. Yeah, for sure, it's one of my loves for Wild's Lance too. Although we don't have the amazing Sunbreak / GU Adept cross sweep, it's nice we have 3 different options out of performing it. Mr. 101 starts off saying nothing could prepare him for the weapon's changes after maining it in Iceborne. It was difficult at first, but after a while, it clicked and he liked it a lot. He seems to really be enjoying guarding and perfect parries, and I quote, and this time, guard lancing is absolutely the intended playstyle. Petia Silk, who didn't really like much of the lance in Wilds, at least liked the perfect guarding, even though it was the only thing he enjoyed. Then there's Hot, who loves how non-committal perfect block is. You can use it as you need it without having to stop attacking, and the options out of block lets you get right back into attacking. Doomy the Great talks about how perfect guard seems to have less of a reliance on guard skills, which is interesting. I did still notice a knockback on harder hitting moves, but I'm curious overall how useful guard will be as a skill. So there are many people who are all for the new perfect parry changes, and I stand with them. Although, like I said, I do miss the cross sweep from Generations and Rise. But the fact we have 3 different options after the parry is pretty cool. I'm wondering how many of those people played Rise Break, because there were some people who seemed to really love the weapon in that game and were still not impressed. And we'll first highlight Cheese MC, who says he prefers Sunbreak Lance in every way, but Wild's Lance is better than World. I want my Sekiro parries back, and I don't like the follow-ups to Perfect Guard. He also talks about hit stun and the lance feeling like a pool noodle. Wet or pool noodle, I guess they're the same, but he recognizes it will probably be fine when it comes to hit stun in the final release. Felipe adds into this saying, they nailed Lance in Rise, it's impossible to go up from there. They ain't wrong, Rise Lance was sick. Anomalous, who says, when you perfect guard something, there's a shield bash, but any follow-up you do has a giga-long gap time before coming out, which is 66.6% right. The return thrust is the quick option, which comes out pretty fast, but the other 2 options, the payback and the follow-up dash, are pretty damn slow. But if you perfect parry, I think the dash is faster than normal. So yeah, while it can be a bit slow at times, there are options to speed up depending on your situation. Lastly, for this part, let's finish off with Yo, who said this at the end of his comment. Being the blocking weapon felt way less special now that all weapons except light bowgun has some form of perfect guard, offset attack, counter, super duper iframe dodges, which is sadly true. And as I was saying before, I believe this is why Lance has been changed in this way. They had to make many new changes, otherwise it would have been lost in the shuffle. But let's hope, in the end, all these new additions help Lance truly shine once again. Before we get into my revised thoughts after reading all of these, let's see what people thought of the focus mode. And we'll start off positive once again with Celtica, who said he thought the focus strikes were really good. And then there's DD, who shared the same opinion, in fact calling it the icing on the cake. And next Joss, who says the lance definitely benefits off of focus mode aiming. However, sometimes its focus mode attacks can be a bit awkward to use. Although I do enjoy focus mode overall, like Celtica and DD, it's also true that the focus strike itself felt awkward. The first part of the move can flinch the monster, so the second part doesn't even hit. And that happened to me so many times. So in the end, I kept my shield raised until I got close enough to strike at the monster. Maybe it'll be a part of the fixes they were talking about. Now there's one more thing I want to go over before we get into the community event. After reading all of these comments, has my opinion changed on Wild's lance? Yes and no. I already felt that the counter thrust has been replaced by the perfect parry. After playing in the beta for a while, that was pretty clear to me. I did adjust to it, but in the end, I never felt like I needed to use the counter thrust. The use case of it was just too unreliable. Even if I do get used to it one day, I just can't actively see myself using it. It'll be more of a case of me saying, oh, I haven't used this in a while, let me try it out and see if it works. The normal mid thrusts are just safer overall, and the damage from the counter thrust isn't that much higher for me to attempt it on a monster over and over. Granted, maybe with 10, 20, 50 hours of experience that would change, and maybe I'll be a counter thrust god. I suppose we have to wait and see on that one. But even with that, there are still issues. The guard dash, the leaping thrust, both just fell off. Definitely the leaping thrust, it's so slow for a move that barely goes anywhere. I'm not impressed by either of those. The next weirdness is the mid and high thrust damage. I just don't see sense in that. And also a fact, in focus mode, you can't move side to side with the high thrusts. Some decisions like that, it just feels like they haven't put enough thought into them, at least to me. And then wide sweep, which is slow as fuck. Why are other weapons becoming faster? Yet we're becoming slower. What is the reasoning there? Honestly, wide sweep doesn't feel fun to use. Even though it's part of the highest DPS combo, I'd prefer just to spam mid thrust. And then like we said before, the focus strike, which I do like and don't at the same time. I like how it looks, but it barely works. The issue of monsters flinching happened to me way too many times in the beta. But I did love the perfect parry. Despite it not being as flashy or fast as Rise Break, it still felt cool to use, and having many options is hella fun. I want to play with it more in the full release. Doing a perfect parry and going into the follow-up dash attack was awesome. It's pretty fast and felt way more reliable than the counter thrust. Although it is difficult to aim, perhaps I'll get better with it. There are parts I like and others I don't. But even though that's the case, I'm sure the more I play with it, the more I'll get used to it. And perhaps I'll see the true overall vision the longer I play it. So now finally, we can get into the changes because they fixed the goddamn counter. Let's go. Now, does it fix the lance for me? Let's look over this and see how I feel. Alright, we're back and here on the pre-launch community update video. And we're going to see what they have to say about the lance and then we'll respond what they're saying as we go.
Yeah, the lance was something where the effects of the adjustments we made were somewhat on the unintentional side. So I wanted to add a variety of different options for guarding and more fine footwork movement options. And the idea was to increase the tool set of things the players had available when they're using the lance. But I think that the unintentional effect of that was that players weren't able to do the classic lance move of being able to wait it out and see what the monster is going to do next and then respond to that in kind. And I think that we ultimately ended up, unfortunately, narrowing the options available, and some players even went so far as to say that the lance action felt monotonous because ultimately with the tools available, they still ended up repeating the same actions over and over again.
Yes, so that was one of the issues that I had. We talked about it earlier as well. About in the end, I just focused more on the perfect parries and the guarding in general rather than using the counter thrust because the counter thrust just seemed so inconvenient. It didn't seem practical to use in a sense in most of the combat. So yes, I do understand that they added in many different ways to counter and to use the weapon because they wanted us to mix up how we play depending on the situation. It's just that from playing it so far in the beta, and I played it for a decent amount, I didn't find many situations where it was feasible enough for me to use the counter thrust. Maybe that was due to my lack of experience. Maybe the more I use it, the better I would have gotten. But it kind of felt like to me it was something that I have to go out of my way to want to use it rather than something that I felt like, you know what, I should be using this because it's good. Not just because it does more damage, but because it makes sense in my normal gameplay overall. From what they say here, they seem to recognize that, and that's why they moved back and have the charge counter now back accessible at any stage throughout your moves. As it says here at the top here, we see charge counters now allow guarding while charging and can be changed into from any other move. This is great to see. It will definitely allow us to play more as we used to do in the past, but still have this new style of lance that Wilds is trying to produce for us.
So in response to that, one thing that I've done is take the counter thrust move, which was a move that was available in past games with the lance, and sort of resurrected that in a new form as what we're now calling the charge counter. And that's something that you can use while guarding as well.
Nice, yeah, that's exactly what people wanted. Being able to use the charge counter at any stages throughout their moves, as it says at the top here, which just adds into the flow and the fluidity of the lance itself, which is great, you know. I'm really happy they decided to do that, and it seems like Capcom also realized from what they're saying before, they unintentionally made it quite linear on the options that we would choose fight to fight, by one option just seeming way too unpractical to use in your average fight. Yeah, so I like this overall. It's good to see that they've taken what people feel seriously, which is nice.
So the addition of this move, as well as the other adjustments that we've made, some of which you can see here, which includes a new move that can be chained into from both Perfect Guard and Power Guard, means I think Lance players will appreciate the ability to read the monster's movements, and you can choose your counter-attack style, and you can even do a Power Guard that will now charge even more quickly or to higher levels if you successfully defend against more powerful monster attacks. So that sort of wait, read and counter style of the Lance I think is going to be getting much better than you might have experienced in the open beta.
That's music to my ears, honestly. That's great. That is great. Now, one of the things that a lot of people talked about, they didn't see the benefit of perfect parrying over just your normal guard, as you still were able to do mostly the same options after it. There was one difference. I did recognize that there was a bit more damage on the perfect parry, your shield burst after it. I'm not too sure if that's confirmed, and also the follow-up dash attack seemed to be much faster and stronger after doing a perfect parry rather than just doing a normal guard on a hit. So that was one thing, but it seems like they didn't think that was enough, which is good. They've added in a new move, which we're going to see in a bit, which was really interesting. When I saw it the first time, I was quite excited. Now the Power Guard stuff is cool, because Power Guard, to be honest, the further the game gets, the less I use it, because it just kind of seems inconvenient. It doesn't seem to defend as strong as I'd like it, but it seems like they're going to add some offensive capability into it. If you guard at a right moment and counter attack a really strong move, you'll be able to do higher damage back depending on the move you take as an impact, which is great. It has that type of retaliation effect, if you know some games like Diablo and all those other type of games where when you get hit, you're able to do damage back to your opponent, which is great. And I think that really fits with the Lance overall. Giving us more power, the better we do our counters.
There's also another variety of adjustments that we've made to the Lance in conjunction with Mr. Fujioka, the executive director and art director, who, as you guys know, is a Lance main, so he takes the Lance very seriously.
Yeah, I hope he takes the Lance seriously.
I worked together with him on these, so I wanted to expand the range of what you can do based on past titles. That has included actually removing some moves that you tended to chain into only on accident, and it would kind of cause confusion and mess up your combos. So I've sort of refined the moveset a little bit in those ways, while at the same time speeding up the cancellation timing of guard dashes that are chained into during combos. So I think that these changes, if you trust me and Mr. Fujioka, are going to make the lads feel better than ever.
So it's interesting there, he says a couple of things. We'll start with the last thing first. He said you can make the guard dash cancelable, which you have to see what the implications of that are in game itself. It'll be quite interesting to see what the impact of that is going to be like. And they also say you chaining into moves by accident have been removed. I wonder what moves in particular he's talking about. I mean, the only move I can think of on the previous games at least was the wide sweep. I don't know if he's talking about the previous games or the beta itself. I don't know. I actually have no idea what they're talking about here. I'm interested to see what they mean in the full game. I don't think we actually see it in the video that we're going to see in a moment, and 100% like the sentiment of them want to improve the range of options we have. As you see me say many times in this video, poke, those to the side, poke, counter. That is our bread and butter with the Lance. It's nice, but when you've been doing that for about, I don't know, 13 years or so, it does get a bit old. So the fact they're changing up in this game, I love the idea, I love the sentiment, it's fantastic. It's just those little things and some of the big things that they need to fix, and it seems like they've updated the counter charge like we said, which is great. Now let's hope some of the other issues that they've highlighted and issues that we've highlighted are much better in the full game. So yeah, I'm excited to see that.
I've got a video for this too, so if we can run that, then you can see what I'm talking about.
Let's see this video. Okay, right there we can see that's the counter, the new charge counter, similar to how it used to work with the high thrust. I'm quite a fan of that. I like that. I really like that. But this makes me wonder what they've done with the high thrust. But we'll see. Okay, that was another counter there. Did that look different? Let's just have a look at that. Oh no. I was mistaken. That was actually the high thrust counter that we saw before. But this time, you can actually counter from it, which is pretty cool. Now that's a new move, which I do really like. I do like how that looks.
And there we have it. Lance getting...
Oh, that was way too quick. Let's have a look at this again. Let's have a look again. 1, 2. So yeah, it counters now, because it didn't used to counter. It didn't used to counter when you do the third hit into it, which is cool. That's nice to see. And you see there, that's the normal counter now that can be used at any time. So they have both of them. They have still the same poke counter fast, but then they have the counter at any time, which is cool. The reason why that's cool is because if you poke twice and you don't want to be committed into that third poke chain, you can now just straight away counter and then go straight into your combos. You can just keep on putting the pressure that way through the counter, not through either stopping and blocking or going through with the high counter thrust technique. There's so many names of counters in it now, it's kind of getting confusing. Yes, okay, so he tanks in a big move. It hits him quite back, I guess because he has no guard, so this attack hits you quite far back. And from there, he's allowed to do that new move, that new strong move. Attacks 3 times. Seems pretty powerful. I'm quite excited. That is good. That is good. That's what we want to see for the Lance. It's definitely a good start. It's definitely a big start. Obviously, we didn't get to see the damage. We didn't get to see if mid thrust is still stronger than high thrust. We didn't get to see wide sweep. There's still things we didn't get to see overall, but I'm excited to play the full package in the full game. Unfortunately, beta 2 doesn't have any of these changes, which is fine. It would have probably been better for them to do that though, but they're not going to do that. But yes, I'm excited. I'm really excited to see what this is going to look like in the end. Yeah guys, this was a long video, but we're finally here, finally did it. The Lance hit and miss. Now, overall, do I think the Lance is a hit or a miss in Wilds? I think it's mostly a hit, although some parts of it, I will say, is a miss. But it definitely seems like from the community update, they've changed a lot. This makes it move more into the hit, but the weapon still seems to be slow in general overall, which is a shame. They haven't said anything about changing that, but I'm sure I'll adjust when the full game comes out. We'll see how it goes on that point. But yeah, that brings us to the end. There's no more hit or miss. This was the last one in the series, and it was a good series. Reading all of your comments. Thank you for everyone dropping comments, you know, liking, subscribing, engaging in this conversation. It's interesting to see different people's opinions. Even if you don't agree with someone's particular take, it's still really cool to understand where they're coming from in general, regardless. I've always liked that, and this series was kind of an extension of that, you know, to see what people think, how they feel, and give them a chance to explain why they feel, and also why they think why they feel too. So I always love that aspect of engagement when it comes to these kind of conversations. So yeah, no, this has been amazing. Honestly, it's been really good. Also, thanks for Novados, who gave me some of the gameplay to show for Monster Hunter 4U. Currently, I don't really have a way to play 4U. I mean, I do have my 3DS, but I haven't tried it in like 7 years. I don't even know if it still works. Also, shout out to Delta, who gave me some longsword footage for World and also for Wilds, and I've been reusing it over a couple of videos. So yeah, that was great there. Thank you for that. And yeah, guys, just thanks for everyone for watching. Like, subscribe, you know, stick tuned. Comment down below on what your favorite weapon was to use in the beta, and yeah, just let me know what you think about this video in general. Anyway guys, that's it for me. I'll catch you guys next time. See ya.